Good evening. Let's call to order the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, June 10th, 2026 at 7:01 p.m. First up is roll call. May we please have roll call?
Yes, thank you. Joining us in person, Director Wong.
Present.
Hines. Tyson.
Here.
Chair Klein.
Present.
Vice Chair Meadows.
Here.
Director Makachuk.
Present.
Showalter.
Here.
Page.
Here.
Lee.
Present.
Joining us remotely, Director Hilton.
No.
Here.
Thank you. And Director Martinez Beltran, is she with you, Director Hilton?
Yeah, she's here. She's just getting logged in right now.
Thank you. We have a quorum present.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Next up is public comment on items not listed on the agenda. Do we have any members of the public in person who wish to speak? I see none. Is there anyone remote wishing to speak on public comment?
Yes, Chair, we have a Gerard Manning. Gerard, whenever you're ready, you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Board, and thank you very much for the chance to speak. I'm Gerard Manning. I'm a retired scientist and a parent concerned about climate change, and I'm also a huge fan of SVCE and your leadership in clean energy and community engagement. It's really inspiring what you do. You heard last month about the Air District Board meeting and how the gas water heater standards are now severely threatened by concerns about affordability, amplified by some very sneaky industry misinformation and fear-mongering. I want to highlight something that's quite little discussed, the enormous climate impact of these standards. So when fully implemented, they will cut over 5 million tons of CO2 emissions per year across the Bay Area. To put that crazy number in context, this is the equivalent of the full electrification of Caltrain, only 40 times more. It's also 10 times greater than the published emission savings from all SVCE activities in the year 2015 to 2022. I don't know what the current numbers are, but one way or another, if this rule gets passed, it will be the equivalent of spinning up literally dozens of CCAs in the area in terms of clean energy, reducing fossil fuel usage, and carbon emissions. Since affordability is the biggest issue with the standards, I want to strongly encourage you to support them by looking further at the possibilities of providing financing options for heat pump water heaters, similar to the programs that are being done by PCE and SJCE. I know your staff has done a lot of work on this, and I know you've done a pilot on tariff on billing, but I think we need to move, because of the scale and the urgency of this issue, I would ask you to accelerate any thoughts there and accelerate, budgetary approval. Basically, this water heater rule has a greater impact than almost anything else you do. The benefits of on-bill financing and consolidation of loans by a CCA are a huge win for the customer. It just makes the whole thing a lot easier than me having to go out and find a bank loan when my water heater is broken. So it really is a good thing to have. And I would also ask that, given the impact, that you accelerate your planning for rule implementation in 2027. So by the November board meeting of the Air District, they need to know what you're going to be doing when the rule comes in, when the applications for water heaters are going to go up tenfold because of rules. And right now, they don't seem to know anything from any CCA. I know you have frequent communication with them, but it doesn't always get through. Even the staff often don't know about rebate programs. So I just encourage you to do everything you can. This is an enormous, enormous opportunity, and I hope you'll grab it. Thank you very much for the chance to talk.
Thank you.
No additional comments, Chair.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close public comment. Next up is adopt a resolution commending Elliot Scazola for his dedicated service to SVCE. And so I'll lead this as opposed to staff. One of the traditions we share here on the board is the opportunity to pause and formally recognize our departing members. Tonight, we're presenting a resolution, which you find in your staff in the packet, a resolution to honor one of our members, Councilmember Elliot Scazola. When SVCE was formed back in 2016, it was built on the collective vision of 11 cities and towns and the County of Santa Clara, but executing that vision depends upon leaders who roll up their sleeves. And so since joining our board in 2023, representing the city of Campbell, Elliot has done exactly that. He didn't just sit on the board, he stepped up to serve on our executive committee, our administration, finance and administration committee, and our legislative ad hoc committee. Elliot's leadership at the agency level translated directly to meaningful progress for his home community. He was a fierce advocate for building electrification, championing innovative reach codes, and supporting our annual student scholarship competitions. SVCE's commitment to Campbell can also be seen in the newly renovated all-electric Campbell Library, a project he proudly helped champion. Thanks to his advocacy, Campbell residents are actively participating in the green transition, claiming over $210,000 in home energy rebates to date. So the resolution that we have as part of our packet tonight is a token of SVCE's gratitude. Thanks to him for his service and for his passion for sustainability. Are there any comments from our board members? Board Member Hines?
Yeah, Terry Hines with Campbell. Upon my recommendation and concurrence with Campbell Mayor Dan Furtado Campbell, I will vote in favor of this accommodation.
Thank you. No other comments? Is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
No comments, Chair.
Okay. I'll close public comment and we'll take it back to have roll call, please. Voice vote.
If I could have a motion and a second, please.
Oh, is there a second? Is there a
I'll second.
Yeah,
Is that a motion?
I'll propose a motion to accept the accommodation.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Board Member Hines or Board Member Wang? Yes.
Thank you. And this is to adopt Resolution 2026-12. Director Wong,
Aye.
Showalter,
Aye.
Tyson,
Yes.
Mekachuk.
Abstain.
Thank you. Hines,
Aye.
Hilton,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran,
Yes.
Chair Klein,
Aye.
Vice Chair Meadows,
Aye.
Director Lee,
Aye.
Director Page.
Abstain.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you. We'll move on to our consent calendar. Any comments or items that our board members want to pull from consent? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and open up public comment on our consent calendar items. Is there anyone in the public wishing to speak on a consent calendar item in the room? Is there anyone remote wishing to speak?
No comments, Chair.
Okay, come back for a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Director Mekachuk,
Aye.
Director Tyson.
Tyson?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it right. Yes.
Thank you. Hilton,
Aye.
Showalter,
Aye.
Page,
Aye.
Wong,
Abstain.
Meadows,
Aye.
Klein,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran,
Yes.
Lee, Hines.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. We'll move on to our regular calendar. First up is the CEO report. And I know Monica isn't able to be here tonight. Amrit, our CFO.
On behalf of Monica, I'm pleased to introduce, and on behalf of all of us at SVC, are very excited to introduce our new Senior Human Resources Manager, Chelsea Rowles. I'll ask Chelsea to come up and speak and share her background. And Chelsea will be reporting to Nick Zanato, our Director of Operations.
Good evening, board members. As said, I'm Chelsea Rawls. I'm the new Senior HR Manager. I've spent the majority of my career over the last decade in HR leadership roles in the tech industry, most recently at OpenSpace AI, where I was the Senior Manager of HR Business Partnership and Operations. I spent my time there building out the HR function from scratch, from the ground up, and have wonderful results in employee engagement and retention. I'm very excited to be here and look forward to working with you all.
Good. Welcome.
Thank you very
Looking
much.
forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. The next item we have is We're going to have a legislative and local policy update from Benna Chang, Director of Government and Legislative Affairs. Benna?
Thank you, Amrit. Good evening, board. So first wanted to give a quick legislative update on the state side. As you may remember, CalCCA, our statewide trade association, and SVCE are sponsoring a bill this year around the power charge and difference adjustment, or the PCIA. This is a fee that our customers pay for legacy resources from the investor-owned utilities. This particular bill would ensure that the investor-owned utilities share data about the power charge and difference adjustment so that we can have better transparency and understanding for how this charge is calculated. So good news on this bill. It passed out of the Assembly recently, is now in the Senate. It's a really great milestone. It is moving along. We're really happy to see the progress there. On other statewide news, we are also working through CalCCA right now to engage on a set of data center tariff bills. This is AB 2383 by Assemblymember Zabur and SB 886 by Senator Padilla. SVCE shares the intent of both of these bills to ensure that there's no cost shifting or risk shifting from data center customers to other customers. But we're also working through CalCCA to really make sure that we're protecting CCA rate-making authority and to ensure that the bills are ultimately implementable. So conversations here are ongoing. Really happy to keep the board updated on the progress there. And then switching gears to local policy, Zoe asked me to give a quick update on the Air District, as you heard through the public comments. So you might be aware that the Air District has conducted a few meetings in May on the zero NOx water heater rules. Air District staff is proposing to delay implementation to October of 2027. And they're also proposing a set of exemptions, including for low-income people and for certain technically very challenging situations. The next step on this is that we anticipate the Air District Board will be voting on the amendments this fall, likely in November. SVCE this summer will be co-hosting an event with the Cities Association on August 31st to ensure that our local leaders have all the information and to answer any questions from constituents about the rules and to address any potential misinformation. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I see no questions from our board members. Thank you.
That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for our CFO in general or comments? Sure. Director Makachek.
Where will our next board meeting be?
Most likely in August in here. Right. Yeah, that's my understanding. There's a little bit of a delay on the building.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and open up public comment. Is there any member of the public in the room who wishes to speak on this item? Is there anyone remote wishing to speak?
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close public comment and continue on to our next item. Item 3, adopt the 2026 Integrated Resource Plan and delegate authority to the Chief Executive Officer for final approval. Is there a staff report? And we have Maren Wenzel, Director of Regulatory Policy and Planning, to speak.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Happy to be here tonight. I know the slide mentions that our senior forecasting and planning analyst, Lee Young, was going to join us. Unfortunately, she's sick this evening. I also want to acknowledge Jessica Feng, our power resource planner, who did a lot of work on this, but is on a much-deserved vacation right now. So yes, we are here this evening to talk about SVC's 2026 IRP. The purpose this evening is really to walk through why the IRP exists, what our requirements are, as well as walk through our draft results and talk through some of the key analyses and pieces of the narrative we intend to include this cycle. Historically, we have always tried to bring the board a substantially complete IRP, but because of the August 10th due date this cycle and our July recess, we are bringing it tonight sort of with a very solid outline of what we intend to include, but ultimately do not quite have the full project ready at this point. So when we get to the action, you'll notice that there is that delegation of authority to Monica to provide final approval. So we'll start first by saying, what is the IRP all about? And first and foremost, the IRP is a compliance obligation that we have from the Public Utilities Commission. The reason why the CPUC put this IRP out there and requires this is that they want to track that collectively all of the CPUC jurisdictional LSEs are on track in order to build an electric system that's going to maintain reliability and achieve the state's clean goals. So essentially what this cycle of the IRP is about is how do we get from roughly 30 million metric tons of emissions in the electric sector in California today down to 8 million metric tons or fewer by 2045. So what they do is all of the LSEs file our plans, our view for what we are likely to build out between now and 2045. And these plans are then stitched together to form what they call a preferred system plan. And this preferred system plan gets used for a lot of downstream analyses by different state agencies, but probably the most important of these is the CAISO's transmission planning process. So this represents the best guess of what the grid needs and resources are going to be in the future. Historically, we filed IRPs every 2 years. However, the CPUC skipped the 2024 cycle. So this is the first IRP we filed since 2022. It's important to note that we don't consider this to be a binding plan. So just because we put a certain amount of geothermal or wind in the portfolio by 2035 does not necessarily mean we're obligated to go out and procure that amount, right? This is our really best guess based on the assumptions that we're working with today. And what we actually go out and procure is going to depend on future market conditions, future CPUC actions, and future load growth. So the IRP itself is composed of really 3 different component parts. The first thing we file is called the Clean System Power Tool. And this is the tool that the CPUC uses to assess our compliance with the emission targets. So we are given a share of that 8 million metric ton target based on our expected load. This tool calculates an LSE's hourly system emissions for different study years. And because, of course, it's a forward look out to 2045, it's relying on modeled assumptions about what things like resource output, emissions, and curtailment will look like in each of those years. The second thing that we file as part of this IRP is the Resource Data Template, or the RDT. This is really a list of all of the contracts that we have in our existing portfolio, everything that's under development, as well as all of the planned resources that we put into our portfolio. And in addition to just listing the contracts, this tool also calculates whether or not we're meeting the reliability requirements that is set out by the CPUC. Importantly, the reliability requirements in this IRP planning process uses a metric called an effective load carrying capability, or an ELCC, which is an annual metric. So for solar, for instance, it might be 9% for a year. And this is a very different way of measuring reliability than what we actually see in the resource adequacy program. So there ends up being a bit of a disconnect there between sort of our actual procurement activities and what goes into this plan. The final thing that we will submit is a narrative document. This is going to run probably between 50 and 75 pages. And in this document, we talk about our modeling process and our results. It also provides us an opportunity to talk through all the risks, the costs, the viability of the portfolios, and really weigh the pros and cons and the trade-offs of different paths that we might take as a load-serving entity. It's also worth noting that this narrative is quite prescriptive in what we need to talk about. And so there are very specific things that we have to cover, including things like how the portfolios impact disadvantaged communities, how potential central procurement activities might impact the portfolio, as well as many other topics. So I think I already hinted at this a bit, but it's important to note that many of the inputs and assumptions that we use in this IRP are mandated by the CPUC. So they don't necessarily reflect our view of the future or what's going to happen to our portfolio. So many of the CPUC provided assumptions we do use. That includes things like the candidate resource profile, so the expected hourly output of different resource types, future system emissions, and those reliability metrics. There's also a number of other assumptions that we look to from the CPUC, but don't necessarily have to utilize. So those are things like the projected future cost of resources, and the available resources. So how much potential is there for a resource like geothermal in the future? And so we want to make sure that our assumptions will be deemed reasonable by the CPUC, but we don't necessarily have to follow them exactly. But of all the assumptions that we're going to talk about tonight, I think the one I really want to call to your attention is the load forecast. So the table or the graphic on this slide shows 3 lines. The top line is the 2026 IRP forecast for SVCE. We are mandated to use this forecast in this filing. The orange line represents SVCE's internal load forecast. And then that gray line at the bottom is the forecast that the CPUC gave us 4 years ago when we filed this IRP. So just want to point out that the CPUC has had a very significant jump in their forecast over the past 4 years. It's now 60% higher in 2035 than it was back in 2022. A lot of this is driven by EVs, building electrification, but there's also quite a bit of data center load assumed in this forecast as well, which, as we've talked about in the past, is quite uncertain. The IRP itself, we are required to submit at least one plan, which is called a preferred conforming plan. Many LSCs only submit one plan. SVC has historically tried to submit at least 2 plans. Last cycle, we submitted 3. The reason why we like to submit more than one is because it helps us really talk through the pros and cons and some of the trade-offs that we make as we set our clean targets and things of that nature. So this cycle, we're proposing a preferred conforming plan that is consistent with the current board adopted targets, where we get to 100% RPS by 2035. And then we're also looking at an alternate conforming plan. This plan is really a proxy for the levers discussions that Justin's been having with the board, and I know he's bringing to you all tonight. This is a very extreme version of that levers discussion where we're assuming that 50% of our load moves to a minimum compliance product, while the remainder stays on a product that meets the current board targets. I recognize it's extreme, but we had to have a pretty meaningful difference between the assumptions in order to get meaningfully different results that really allowed us to weigh some of those pros and cons. There's also a number of other scenarios that we are looking at, but will not be submitting as formal plans. So there won't be RDTs and CSPs associated with them. Instead, we're just going to show the results in the narrative to speak to some sort of key policy points we want to make. So the first one is a look at what our portfolio might look like if we had used that orange line from the prior slide using our internal load forecast. So that will give us an opportunity to talk about the importance of load forecast uncertainty. The second scenario is to some degree required because the CPUC has asked us to talk about how potential actions from the central procurement entity might impact our portfolio. And we decided the easiest way to do that would just be to model it. So we've also done a scenario where we take those allocations and force them into the portfolio so we can see how it would impact our results. And I'll share both of those results with you this evening as well. Before I get into the results, I just wanted to give a quick overview of where we are in the process. I will say the modeling here is sort of substantially complete. We are, knock on wood, not going to find any errors as we move forward, and everything will stay as it is and as I show it to you tonight. But we are still doing some review, so subject to minor changes. But essentially the way this process has worked is we've taken our baseline portfolio, so all the resources we have online today. We've then pulled together all of our assumptions about what candidate resources might look like, so the cost of resources going forward, what their energy output would look like, and things of that nature. Put in other assumptions like the load forecast and our clean targets. All of that gets fed into a capacity expansion tool, which is essentially trying to find the least cost set of resources that hit all of those targets. We do our best to calibrate that model with the CPUC's compliance tools. But inevitably, there's a little bit of a disconnect. And so we go through a post-processing step where we have to add a little bit more capacity to make sure that we're hitting all the targets we need to hit for our conforming plans. So that is, as I said, substantially complete. And now we're going through the process of doing some additional analyses, trying to make sure we have nice, pretty compliance deliverables, and then writing our narrative in order to get this all done by our filing date on August 10th. So with that, I can get into the actual results that we have for you this evening. So this is a look at our preferred conforming plan. Once again, this is what it would take according to our model to maintain the board's clean targets with the load forecast that we've been provided. So these model results that we indicate that we need to add nearly 4 gigawatts of additional capacity by 2045. Likely, the vast majority of this would be new build, but given there are a number of renewable resources on the grid that are reaching their end of life, there may be opportunities to repower wind facilities or solar facilities as well in here. A couple things to point out about the portfolio itself. I think it's a fairly diverse mix of resources that the model selected. There is quite a bit of onshore wind and quite a bit of geothermal. I will say if we had let the model build what it wanted, it would have built even more of both of those resources. We had to pull it back a little bit on that, those two options. The other thing I'll point out just before I jump to the next slide is that you'll notice towards the end of the forecast horizon, we had quite a bit of solar and hybrid resources. So keep that in mind as we jump to this slide. So what this slide shows is the mix of resources over time. So the light blue on the bottom represents how much energy we're getting from our existing PPAs. So you'll see in the 2030s, many of those contracts start to roll off. And so some of that 4 gigawatt build is to replace those contracts, including a lot of the hybrid and solar that we have in the portfolio today. The darker blue is representative of the energy that we're getting from the new PPAs, that roughly 4 gigawatts of capacity. And then the yellow and orange sort of hash mark pieces, that is the short-term energy that we're putting into the model each year. So what we tell the model is that you need to select between 15 and 35% of your energy must come from short-term products. We have found that the model generally found this to be very cost-effective, so we tend to be pushing up against that 35% number as we go throughout all of the years. Another couple quick things I'll point out on this slide is you'll see in the years where we have a binding emissions target, 2035, 2040, and 2045, we get a big spike of energy. That's because the model is binding on emissions. So the main thing it's building for is to ensure that we hit those targets. The other thing you'll notice is that the energy, total energy stack actually sits above our IRP load forecast. And so we're procuring more energy than we have retail sales. And as we'll talk more about in a minute, that's because the Clean System Power Tool is assuming quite a bit of curtailment. So we actually lose a lot of the energy in our portfolio. Before we get into the emissions results, I want to talk quickly about our reliability results. So the way we do this as staff is we take the model results from the capacity expansion tool and put it into the CPUC's reliability tool. And then if there's a short position, so if we still have a gap that we need to fill, we backfill the portfolio with short-term natural gas contracts. However, what we find in the preferred conforming plan is that on average, we're meeting about 60% of our reliability needs with clean resources. And importantly, in almost all years, we're using less than our load share of the CPUC's assumed available gas fleet. So we think it's a defendable amount of the gas fleet to be using. In the 2 years where we're over, it's by a relatively small margin, and it also happens at the end of the forecast horizon. So I think we feel comfortable with that. Jumping to the emissions results, our targets that were provided to us by the CPUC are in red at the top here. Of course, we are hitting our targets, right? That's an artifact, it's a requirement that we hit those targets. So nothing surprising at the top of this graphic so much. What I wanted to make the board aware of is you'll notice that our retail sales here are in 2045 just over 8,000 gigawatt hours, but our total supply is well over 10,000 gigawatt hours. And that's because if you look at the next row, you see that we have very significant curtailment. So in this clean system power tool, we're losing about 20% of our energy by 2045 to curtailment. As a result of that, when you look at the delivered RPS numbers, it's quite a bit below the actual board targets. So this left us as staff with sort of a question of what to do. We could have either forced a lot more capacity into the model in order to ensure that the CSP tool showed 100% RPS, or where we're suggesting we head instead is we leave it as is, given how high the load forecast is, and also speak to some of the ways that we as an organization can mitigate curtailment, and also provide a few critiques to the CPUC about the CSP tool itself and whether or not we really trust these curtailment numbers.
May I interrupt with a question?
Go ahead.
Since you're referring to the curtailment, which is the production of excess electricity which cannot be used, and I'm wondering, since you've driven so much of this growth by the two factors, which are the EV charging and also the data centers, and what I'm reading about data centers from our buddy Severin Bornstein is that it's possible for them to adjust their energy demand during the day, and I know that's also true with EV charging. So I'm just wondering, given the size of the magnitude of this curtailment issue, to what extent have we planned anything in terms of adjustment of that load to fit the times where we have that excess energy?
Yeah, we did have, so we aren't allowed to change the total load forecast. We do technically have the option to provide an alternate load shape that we would have to justify. We did go through the process of building alternate load shapes based on our internal view. I will say they weren't meaningfully different than what was in the CSP. So we're using the CSP shapes right now. But I think your broader point is, how much actual load shaping can we do? And I don't think that is being addressed very thoroughly in the IRP process today, is maybe one way of putting it. The other thing I will note is these curtailment assumptions are based on a plan that the CPUC provides, right? They create a view of what the system build out is going to be and use that to run the model that creates the dispatch. Their model, if we just were to take our load share allocation of that model, we would have put a lot more solar into our portfolio. So I think that there's probably a lot more solar assumed in this CSP tool than what we'll actually see when they stitch these plans together and create their new PSP. So I think that might also be a driver, if that's helpful.
And so given that's 2045, we have almost 20 years to get smarter in all these fronts.
That's the goal. Yes. All right. So with that, we can jump to our alternate plan. As a reminder, this assumes that 50% of our load is on a minimum compliance product. Because we are binding on the emissions constraint, we actually don't see a huge difference in the total build out. It's still meaningful. We build about between 641 fewer megawatts in the alternate conforming plan than we did in the preferred plan, but overall a similar build out and a pretty similar mix of resources. The reliability results are also relatively similar, but because we have lower build, we are leaning on the system more. And so we are starting to exceed our load share allocation of the gas fleet in many years. And I think that's part of the reason why this might be a less preferable plan to adopt. Once again, by nature, all of these plans have to hit our CO2 targets, so they are doing that. Our curtailment numbers are lower in this scenario, but a lot of that is because our supply is much lower and we're using a lot more system power. And you'll also notice that our achieved RPS is about 10% lower in this alternate plan. So with that, I can talk a little bit more about our sort of what lays ahead for our work. So I'll start with sharing the results of that alternate load scenario. So once again, this is what we would build out if we used our internal load forecast. The headline, of course, is that our build is going to be much lower in the scenario. We're building less than half of what we built in the preferred conforming plan. I will note that that post-processing step that we did for the other two plans, we weren't able to do here because we don't know what our emissions targets would be. So you can imagine that these numbers perhaps would be a little bit higher if we were able to use this plan for actual compliance purposes. But the main story is that we build a whole lot less, and especially you'll notice that we are not building nearly as much geothermal in this scenario. So the other scenario that we've looked at is this central procurement entity scenario. Here, once again, the CPUC provided us with very specific allocations for resources they wanted us to put into the portfolio and very specific dates for when they wanted those resources to come online. So we added 177 megawatts of offshore wind, 21 megawatts of 100-hour storage to the portfolio. They also gave us allocations for 12-hour batteries and geothermal, but we already functionally had that in the portfolio. So we just sort of say, okay, we'll imagine the CPE procured that instead of us. Overall, you see not a huge total difference in procurement. It's about 51 megawatts, but a pretty meaningful decrease in the amount of solar that we put in the portfolio in this scenario. So quickly, just to give a heads up on some of the additional analysis that we're working on. We are doing a cost and risk analysis for each portfolio. And by we, I should actually say Scott, and specifically Anand and Scott's team has been doing a great job working on this. We don't have everything wrapped up, but I can say at this point, our draft results indicate that the power supply costs for the preferred plan are probably about 4% higher than the alternate plan. That makes sense, right? It's a lower compliance target, but that plan will likely be a more risky plan, that alternate plan, because we have more exposure to the short-term market. So still working on more analysis there, and if anyone on the board would like to see that when it's complete ahead of the filing date, we'd be happy to provide that. Another piece of analysis that this time Chris's team, Owen on Chris's team is working on is the reliability analysis. So what we're doing here is we're taking our IRP portfolio, including all of that short-term natural gas, so a portfolio that is compliant using the IRP metrics, and we're putting it into the RA slice of day tool that we have. And our early results indicate that in 2035, it looks like our portfolio is actually short, does not have enough capacity if you use slice of day metrics. By 2045, that problem seems to resolve. But I think the bigger sort of narrative to the CPUC on this is that functionally, if you're providing us with metrics that aren't aligned with our actual procurement practices, you're going to get plans that are not aligned with what we're going to end up doing. The final piece of analysis we're working with an outside consultant on is really talking through the transmission viability of these portfolios, given the really pretty huge numbers that we're seeing in our build out. Finally, just some key narrative points that we expect to highlight. One, as I mentioned, our model results indicate that there's a huge amount of value in clean, firm resources as well as onshore wind. And so there's a very big need for the state to ensure that we're doing the transmission build out we need in order to support these resources. While there is a huge amount of geothermal in the portfolio, that's not because the portfolio likes, hot steam coming from the ground. It's because it likes 24/7 clean resources. And so we'll also speak to the fact that a, perhaps meaningful portion of that 325 megawatts, I think it is, of geo could ultimately manifest as a different emerging technology. So perhaps a small modular reactor, a carbon capture project, something of that nature. And then, of course, we'll talk about many of the things I just pointed to, all of the load forecast uncertainty, the planning challenges associated with the central procurement entity. Some of those allocations start hitting the portfolio in the early 2030s. So that's something that our procurement team will need to know about very soon so that they can really plan around those allocations if they are going to come. Just spoke to the alignment issues between IRP and RA metrics. The last sort of big topic, which I really haven't touched on yet tonight, is we really want to indicate to the CPUC that we feel very strongly that there's a need to finalize development of what they call the Reliable Clean Power Procurement Program, or RCPP. That's something many of you have probably heard me talk about before, but as a reminder, essentially the RCPP is the CPUC's effort to try to figure out how we move away from order by order based procurement and move to a stable procurement program that does not rely on these procurement orders. Because functionally what happens is every time they issue one of these procurement orders, it is based on not the LSE's needs, but the system's needs. It has very strict dates by which point those resources need to come online. And importantly, the accounting metrics in the procurement orders are not aligned with either the RA program or the IRP planning program. And so what you get is these procurement orders come online and they really fundamentally throw our plans out the window. So if we want a functioning IRP planning process, we have to figure out a way to get away from these procurement orders. So I'll very quickly summarize the request from staff to the board tonight. So we are seeking approval from the board to adopt our proposed preferred conforming and alternate conforming plans for submission in our 2026 IRP. And then secondly, given the timing to delegate authority to the CEO to finalize and submit for approval to the CPUC, our IRP by August 10th. And with that, I will thank you for your time and turn it back to the chair.
Thank you. Are there questions? Director Showalter.
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions, actually. This is very meaty stuff, and every time I look at it, I think of new questions. I would like you to just kind of go over one of the sticks on the histogram, and tell us what's in it. I mean, basically, as I understand it, each of those columns is the new energy sources that need to come online that year. Is that right?
I'll pull up our preferred plan because that's the one that the CPUC is likely to use for the TPP process. Yeah, I think that's the right way of thinking about it. The intent is that the table shows the cumulative build for each of those years, but that, yes, this graphic, what it's showing, for instance, in 2033, where you see 120 of that blue column, that implies that there's 120 megawatts of onshore wind that we would bring into the portfolio that year.
And then we would continue to use that over time until that contract wears out, and then we'd need to get, the model shows us the new stuff we'd have to procure, right?
Yes, that's correct. And given the assumed contract duration for all of these projects, everything that you see in this graphic would stay online for the duration of the planning horizon.
Oh, okay. So they're like 25, 30-year contracts?
They are, I'd have to go back and look. I think it may vary a little bit by technology type, but yeah, I think we're looking at least 20.
Oh, okay. That's the general, okay.
Right.
And then I was sort of surprised why all of a sudden at the end, there's this really tall stack on all of the scenarios. So what's going on with that? Is that the early contracts have come to an end? They've
Some of that is that you do see in this graphic. So the bottom part, this light blue, that's our existing portfolio. And so you do see that between 2040 and 2045, we do lose a significant piece of our actual, portfolio that we have today. And so a lot of the build is for that reason. I think some of it is also that the emissions target in 2045 is quite aggressive. So we have to build in order to ensure that we're hitting that.
Oh, okay, so the emissions reduction target increases as well. Yeah, that's true, it does. Okay, thank you. And then another thing that I noticed, of course, there's no nuclear, and that would make sense because at the moment we're expecting nuclear to end in 2030 in California. And that might not be the case, but that's not included in here, right?
That is correct. And in fact, I'm glad that you brought that up. I had meant to mention that this, the CPUC has also directed us not to even include the portion of Diablo that we expect to receive through 2030. So there's absolutely no nuclear here, including stuff that we know in reality will be there. So yes.
Okay. And then the other thing that there is in here, and we don't have much of it on the West Coast that I know of, maybe none, is offshore wind.
Correct. We did have offshore wind as a candidate resource. In our model results, it was never selected. In that central procurement entity scenario, it is forced into the portfolio, that 177 megawatts of offshore wind.
Okay. So, I mean, currently with the current administration, we're not going to do that anyway, but this goes after that. Okay, and let me think, was there anything else? Oh, I always make, these water analogies. I can't help myself. I'm sorry. But if all of you were, have been, I'm sure you've heard recently about the urban water management plans that you have had to do. And it seems to me that this is really very much an analogous exercise, where essentially we're being asked to do analysis that shows that we've figured out how we're going to supply the power we need to supply in the next 30 years. And in the water management, the urban water management plan, the exercise is to essentially say that we have the water supply for 100% of our zoning build out. And neither is probably very realistic, but in terms of making sure that we plan properly, they're important exercises. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Director Page.
Thank you. So I just one simple question. On one of the charts, one that was your CPUC IRP summary and purpose, you show that in 2023, there were 360.4 million metric tons of California emissions. Do you know what it was, say, in 25, or how are we doing?
It's a good question. I tried to find a more recent graphic than this, and I think this is the last reported numbers that we have. I might be wrong on that, but that was the most recent one I could find.
Sure, it'd be great to know where we are before we start going.
Yeah.
Director Makachek.
Yes. Could you go to the slide that shows the demand, please? There we go. Does the CPUC give you any insight into the load growth that makes up, or sorry, what makes up the increase in the load growth?
Yeah, so this load forecast is coming from the CEC's IPER forecast, which is the sort of standard state forecast. We do know from the IPER forecast what the modifiers are. I will apologize, I don't off the top of my head have that breakdown with me this evening, but we could go back and pull those numbers and see exactly what they are. I will note that the IPER forecast has a pretty clear breakdown. The way it works in the CSP tool is that they break out all of those load modifiers again, but they don't do it in an LSE specific way, if that makes sense. So if we're 2% of the load, we get 2% of the EVs and things of that. So that's another area where the CSP tool is a little, I guess, blunt, a bit of a blunt instrument.
And in this, there's no allocation by time of day. It's just here's what the load is going to be.
Yeah, so the forecast they give us is annual, but the tool that we then input it into, that clean system power tool, it has hourly level granularity.
Okay. And is there anything on the rates? Because I believe that people can change their behavior and technology can help them change their behavior based on the rate by time of day.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing for us to be thinking about. There is a whole other planning process that we go through with the CEC, the load management standards plan. And that looks a lot more at real-time pricing and how to value and think through demand flexibility. So I'm not sure that that's as fully baked into the IRP process as it could be. I will say one of the challenges that we have as staff, and I know this is shared by many LSEs, is that the CPUC releases all of their materials and only gives us 6 months to develop this plan. And that means 6 months to August 10th. So we've had to do all of this over the last 4 months, which means that thinking through some of these bigger questions where you start to really play with, shaping load and making a lot of changes to the CSP tool, it can be challenging to do all of that. And that's actually another thing that we'll highlight in the narrative is if you want us to provide really robust plans, it would be really nice to have more time so that we could think through things like, a scenario where we've shaped our load better or something of that nature.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Meadows?
Thank you, and very nicely put together presentation as always. So does the CPUC choose between the two plans we submit, or do we call one preferred? Does that mean that they're going to choose that one, or how do they, or do they gamish them together, or what goes on there?
Yeah, historically, and so we've been filing IRPs since 2018. So this is because we skipped 2024. If I'm doing my math right, this is only the 4th time we've ever filed IRPs, and I don't think there's been a single instance where they haven't used the preferred conforming plans from all LSEs as the default for the development of the preferred system plan, with a minor exception in 2018 where when they let everybody use different load forecasts. And so when they stitched things together, it got really hairy. So yeah, we should essentially assume that the preferred plan is what will make its way into the transmission planning process going forward.
Okay. And is this then, is this essentially a planning tool for them, and we're not held accountable for what our reality looks like? So for example, if we look back 4 years ago, those stacked columns would presumably look different than what we submitted. So is there an accountability for us, or they just use it to come up with their own planning?
Yeah, there was some discussion 4 years ago as part of the early discussions revolving around that RCAAP about whether or not the plans should be enforceable. I think when you have the inputs and assumptions jumping around so much, it's really hard to imagine a world where they can have that be the case. I went through this morning and looked at our 2022 plan, and just as a point of reference, I think our total build out is less than 700 megawatts in that plan by 2035. So it would be strange, I guess, to have any plan enforceable when, next cycle we could end up with a much lower load forecast. And that's before you even think about the impacts of procurement orders. So I think it's a low risk that they would enforce this.
Okay, so is it fair to say then this is it is a requirement, and so we provide it, but it's not necessarily our primary planning tool in some of the forecasting we do? Is that a fair statement?
I think that's fair. In the past several years, SVC staff has built, we really worked on building up the planning team. So our intent going forward is that we're going to be doing some what I'll call internal IRPs, where we look at the world more aligned with sort of our view. So that's our goal.
All right, thank you. Very helpful.
Thank you. Director Tyson?
Yes, I still have a couple of questions that popped up. And if you could just display any of them, say they're not numbered, but how about the preferred plan, which is the second slide there. I'm just not sure I'm understanding. So when we're talking about the cumulative build, this is the build of energy sources. And so storage is not an energy source. It's a way to collect energy that came from someplace. And so I'm just not sure how this adds up into a total. You see what I'm saying?
So yeah, I think so. So this particular graphic is showing capacity values. So these are all assumed to be bundled PPAs where we're getting the energy as well as the capacity off of the projects. You're right that there's no energy really associated with batteries. The way they provide value in the Clean System Power tool is that they shift our clean energy to dirtier hours of the day. So that's how they help us hit our emissions targets.
And thus the curtailment thing we talked about before. But then what's with all the yellow here late in the year in this? What we don't want just solar. So I'm having trouble understanding that.
Yeah, that's a fair question. So I will maybe make two notes on that. First, and this probably isn't particularly clear in the graphic. If you look at 2045, for example, when we show hybrids, that's actually suggesting that there's 300 megawatts of batteries and 300 megawatts of solar being built in that particular year. But I think your question is perhaps more about the standalone solar that's getting added.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, I think it's that the model finds it to be quite cost effective and that there's some surprising things that we found in the CSP tool. For example, if you put in standalone solar and standalone batteries, for some reason you get better results than if you put in hybrids, even though you would expect you wouldn't have curtailment off your hybrid because it'd be charging your own batteries and things of that. So some of it is probably modeling attributes a bit. The other thing I might point out is even though this looks like quite a bit of solar, as I might have mentioned earlier, it's actually quite a bit less solar than if we had just taken our load share of the plan that the PUC put together. So I also tend to agree it looks like a lot of solar and a lot of energy that we're throwing away. It is hard to find a solution in the CSP tool where you don't have high curtailment if you're providing a lot of your own energy.
Okay, well, I think this reinforces the point that Director Showalter said, that this is an extra meaty topic. And I'm hearing some issues about the modeling, and you're trying to come up with something that you can present. And so I appreciate that. And we'll see how it plays out. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Director Wong.
Yeah, I have two questions. It's great to see the capacity. Do we know the cost per kilowatt for each one of these sources or an average in that year?
I don't have those values yet. I suspect that's something that we will be getting when we have the cost and risk analysis done. So that's something we can certainly provide to the board.
Okay, and the second piece is in your RP, you have to do LCBF on the least cost best fit methodology. As you're trying to create balances around that in distribution and in costs, what were the trade-offs that were in your assumptions?
Yeah, so the model itself does a lot of that work for us, right? It tries to solve for everything. I think in the post-processing step where we had to then add additional capacity, it was a lot of working with our procurement group directly with Monica, just saying, okay, what do we think is actually feasible here? Because these were, quite frankly, pretty eye-popping results when they came back. This is a lot of capacity for us to be adding. And we actually know that the model would have liked to add more geo and more onshore wind, but we started to question, okay, can we actually get this built? And so some of it is just intuition, which I know isn't maybe a super satisfying answer to the least cost best fit. But I think that's ultimately ultimately where we landed with some of this.
Got it. And we're getting a lot of complaints in our region on affordability. As you know, the average cost in the nation is 16 cents a kilowatt hour. In China, it's going from 8 cents to 6 to 4 to 2. Europe is a different problem. They're 25 to 29 cents. We are 44 cents. What are we doing to tackle the distribution aspect on the PG&E side?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very big question. I think there's that work is being tackled across SVC through a number of different ways, some of which are not, in the planning space. It's practically through our program work, through a lot of our regulatory work and things of that nature. I think maybe one thing I would point to on the planning side of things is that part of the reason why we've had such dramatic build out and so many of these procurement orders over the last few years is because we did find ourselves short capacity, and that caused a very big reaction. And I think that's been quite expensive for us to overcome. So I think it is a very important exercise for us to make sure that we are maintaining reliability, and that we're trying to figure out ways to do this in the most cost-effective manner. And I think some of our narrative will get to this, right? And that's why we're going to talk through things like, don't overcommit to this very high load forecast yet. This could be very expensive. Let's talk through the cost implications of procurement orders for LSE's potential stranded asset risks. So I think we can speak to some of those issues, but there's probably even better places we can push on the affordability piece.
I really appreciate that. And just the last question, if this is not related to this, please just don't answer it. The question is really on decentralized production. Are we doing anything to include that as a source and for optimization for decentralized power generation for excess solar?
Yeah, I'll try to cover it and let me know if this doesn't quite hit the mark. So we are given, as part of the load forecast, we are given a assumption about what behind the meter solar will look like going forward. So that is one of those load assumptions that we have to stick to in our modeling. It is there. Historically in IRP modeling, the models that are used, whether it's what we're using or Resolve, which is the tool that the CPUC uses, it doesn't find behind the meter to be cost effective on a system-wide basis. I will say that there's other work being done both at the state and at SVCE to try to think about, how to better align distributed resources to ensure affordability. That happens in a number of proceedings. And I do think that the new net billing tariff, the new NEM tariff, does incentivize batteries in a way that the old tariff didn't. So that hopefully is going to help a bit.
No, appreciate it. And we don't have virtual power plant technology in as well. So that's part of it. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I see no other questions from our directors. Let's go ahead and open up public comment on this. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this item? No one in the room?
None online, Chair.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the board. This is an action item. Do I have a motion? Dr. Makchek.
I'd like to make a motion as set forth on the slide here, the recommendation from staff.
Thank you.
Second.
I'll let the clerk decide.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And with that, please conduct the roll call vote.
Yes, Director Lee.
Aye.
Page.
Aye.
Vice Chair Meadows.
Aye.
Director Hines.
Aye.
Chair Klein.
Aye.
Makachek.
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Martinez Beltran.
Yes.
Showalter.
Aye.
Tyson.
Yes.
Hilton.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries unanimously.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next item. Item 4, receive results of our stress test analysis. Scott Rigglesworth, Director of Risk Management and Analytics. The floor is yours.
Good evening, directors. we'll jump right in. We're going to try to move briskly, and we'll give you some time for questions. So we can go to the next slide. So we're going to cover 5 items here very fast. The purpose here is really about reserves. So the messaging you should hear loud and clear through my comments are the importance of reserves, okay? Let's move past this slide. We'll just jump right in. So this is our process, right? So I'm going to work backwards. We have a mission. Our mission requires a budget and a plan. Those come from strategic focus areas, which come from our understanding of our ERM, or risk management environment. Next slide. A key aspect of that risk management plan is getting our risk register together. Our staff contributes comprehensively to understanding many potential things that can impact us, and that gets distilled down to a risk matrix that we use internally, and then to the specific cases that we're going to consider in our stress testing we do each year. Next slides. So the first thing I want to do is calibrate you or level set you on the base case that we're calling in the stress test exercise. So the last you saw of reserve projections would have been the mid-year budget. That mid-year budget, there's 2 things that change on this chart. This is the gray lines. The first thing that changes is the fact that we're moving to a new structure for the fiscal year. We went from a September end to a December end. So we went back to the mid-year budget and we said, what would the reserve levels be on a calendar basis instead on the 5-year forecast? So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to call out is that the mid-year budget didn't have a forecast of 0 in 31. It just didn't go that far. So that's an NA out there on the bar chart as not available, but the new base case does. So what you're seeing here is the gray bars are where the reserve levels in terms of days cash on hand that we presented to you at the mid-year budget. The blue bars are the updated base case for the stress testing. So we're basically showing you a slightly more favorable projection, largely due to market price movements since the mid-year budget, and giving you some guidance on a new base case here, okay? The figures at the bottom I'll just mention are dollars. The figures in the bar chart are days cash on hand, okay? Next slide. So how do we construct the stress testing? One of the key things we want you to notice is over the last several years, commodity prices for our space have declined considerably. In fact, if we were to go back to the stress test presentation a year or 2 ago, we were probably telling you that the current prices that we see today were a stress case. And so one thing you should note is just the plausibility of that happening. So you can see these prices have declined considerably. Next slide. So I'm going to jump to the reasons that we would project further decline, right? So you might say, well, if we've come to those price levels, then why are you telling us that we need to stress those, right? And there's different reasons. Prudent risk management would be one. We never know if prices have reached the bottom. Black swan events, or things that kind of fall out of the probabilistic range of outcomes, can happen and they can cascade or compound on one another. They're not a prediction, so we're not trying to tell you that these are going to happen. They are meant to test financial resiliency. They're extreme but plausible. So not that we're saying it's a likely outcome, but that it's possible. And then there's just the note that I've already made. The fact that we've experienced this and we've brought to you budgets with this from past stresses should give you enough pause to contemplate what could happen with future stress. Next slide. There's a few scenarios we also did beyond price stress testing. I'm not going to get into the details for the sake of time, but one relates to Marin's presentation, and that is procurement orders. And then two others that did not get quantitative stress testing, but we want you to be aware of. If we go to the next slide. One is affordability, which Director Wong raised even in the last presentation. And so pressures on affordability can also create dynamics for the business. And then the last thing is the PCIA aspect. So staff has raised that many times from many different directions, which is on the next slide. And that is just the uncertainty of the outcomes. There's lots of engagement. These are risks that the staff is mitigating, but they are things that could throw us a curveball that could stress the business. So into the results of the stress testing, we just go ahead a couple slides. So now the blue bars are here, the recalibrated base case that I shared with you, and you'll see the orange bars. You might note that the stress case is a better outcome in the first year. This contemplates the fact that rates are set for this year, and so changes in cost could be beneficial in the short run, but the stress case overall is detrimental to the business. We're not saying that we would go to negative 245 days cash on hand, but business as usual with carelessness would lead one there, okay? The next slide layers on the quantitative aspect of the procurement orders. If we were to acquire assets by procurement order and pay for those at current market costs and later prices collapse, then there would be some stranded asset or stranded cost, and that's reflected in the green. But the procurement orders don't come till the tail end of this 5-year forecast. So one thing I want you to note is that stranded cost we estimate ongoing is around $60 million a year. So that's a number for you to contemplate with additional stress in the long run from procurement orders. Okay, next slide. So what are we asking you for? Remember I said at the beginning, this is really about reserves. It's making you aware. We're not asking you to vote on anything, but we do want you to understand that we're monitoring lots of things to understand the risks. And we're seeking your approval, which I don't want to steal Justin's thunder, but he's presenting next on the financial leverage playbook. And we'd ask that you implement that as necessary to give us the tools to address this possible outcome in the future. With that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the expedited presentation. Are there any questions? And I know that this has gone through several committees.
It
before
has,
getting here.
yes.
So thank you for that. I know that multiple of us have seen it before, but any questions? Any questions? Director Wong.
These are never easy to do, so really appreciate the work that's been done here.
Sure.
I do have a question. What's the industry standard for a entity like ourselves for days of cash on hand? Because for normal utilities, I remember it sits somewhere between 250 and 300, but we're not a normal utility.
Correct.
So what is the expectation of us?
So I'll let Amrit chime in, but our peers are in the range that we are or a little lower.
Yeah, the standard for CCAs, I would say we are on the higher end because of the activity we've done here with stress testing. We've been doing it for a number of years. Some of the other CCAs are probably feeling more pressure now with the way the market conditions have turned as a result. We're not the highest. I think there's one other CCA that's higher than us. But I think in terms of what we're experiencing and what we've budgeted and managed, and also in discussions with our credit rating agency, have been just about the right level for us.
So Moody's and Fitch are okay with this?
We are rated very well we have an A grade rating from S&P and a A3 from Moody's and with the S&P we have a positive outlook. Yeah, and the credit rating agencies look at the reserves, and that's one of the big key indicators as to why we got the rating increases, and actually then most recently with a positive outlook.
Oh, thank you very much. Good work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director Tyson.
Well, I appreciate these models and I also appreciate the long-term approach and also how if there's a kind of a train wreck coming, we see it in slow motion, we have a chance to adjust. That's part of the message I get from this. I'm puzzling now as I think from a geopolitical perspective. And granted, this is a long-term thing. The Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
My first thought is that should raise energy prices, but then we have an energy surplus here and we can't sell it to these other parties. So now I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know what to happen. And I imagine these geopolitical aspects factor into your expectation of what energy prices can be.
That is correct. I know that the higher prices we experienced in the last couple of years that were triggered in part by the Ukraine conflict were unexpected at the time and impacted higher prices. Obviously, Hormuz is impacting oil prices, but that's not finding its way to natural gas, which is kind of the trigger for us, is the natural gas price.
Well, I believe there's a bottleneck, so our ability to sell natural gas to other places is
so we
limited.
have an adequate supply in the States, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. No other questions from the directors. Let's go ahead and open up public comment. Is there any member of the public in the room who wishes to speak? Is there anyone remote?
No hands raised, Chair.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close public comment. And there's no action needed on this item.
That is correct.
So thank you, Director Makachek.
When will you do the next stress test?
So the stress test timing was largely based on the cycle of the budget. Since we're shifting the budget year, it'll probably be a little later than this next year.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. And I would like to compliment my staff. I forgot to mention up front, Alex Kraus worked very hard on this, as well as Idis and Anand. So appreciate their efforts.
No, and thank you. It's like I understand throwing the monkey wrench in as far as changing our budget year.
Yes.
Only created more concern or
Sure.
Created more difficulty as far as this annual like worst case scenario. But
Right.
I appreciate that. It's like I think as we go to a fiscal year that's tied to a calendar year,
Yes.
I think it'll be easier for future board members, and it makes it a little bit easier mentally as we're looking at this, as opposed to the odd point of when our rate set in December or January and all that. So thank you for the hard work that goes into this, and thank you for trying to keep our eyes opened on potential risk in the future.
Very good. Thank you.
And with that, we will move on to our next item, item 5. Approve the financial levers playbook. Justin Zagunis, Director of Customer Success.
Great, thank you. Good evening. Yes, I am back to talk about our financial levers. There's not a ton of new content in this presentation. Really, the kind of focus over the last few months has been how do we capture the conversation we have had, reflect sort of the uncertainty moving forward, but still give us something to kind of act on and start planning around. So that's what you're going to see in the presentation today. So I'm not going to mention everything that I have on some of my slides because it's mostly there to remind you of a conversation we've already had. But happy to go back and talk about anything that we want to. So mostly focused on recap, and then we'll really talk about what the playbook is, and then I'll give an example of how we'll use it, which I think makes it a little bit more concrete. But there are a lot of slides, so I wanted to start with the takeaways for today. And you just heard from Scott about risk and volatility and uncertainty in the future. This really, the playbook is risk mitigation for us. That's what this is. We're not saying we have to take an action right now. We have a lot of reserves. Our forecast shows that we're in good standing for this year, we're in good standing for next year. We have this sort of time horizon, but we want to be thinking about it. It's helpful. It's prudent to be thinking about where will we go if needed. We're going to talk about a split product and what that could look like, what our product mix could be. And I just want to say, this is something that if we approve as part of the playbook, we will then develop further over the coming year to really kind of hone in on what that will look like. So we're really saying this is the plan, but we still need to fine tune it, and the board will see that. And then something we heard from the board throughout the feedback that we got over the last 6 months is balance. And so we want to take an approach that balances across all the levers. And so hopefully you see that in what I've got here. So you're going to see this 3 times today, so don't try to digest it in this first one. I'll just say for this first time you see it, the first 2 are things we're going to start doing now, soon. First one's something we always do, which is try to find operational efficiencies, but we're going to lean more into that, make sure we're really looking at everything. And then for 2026, 2027, what we will do is our plan will be to maintain our current approach in terms of clean product, program deployment, and our discount to PG&E. And so that's useful from a planning standpoint. The bottom 3 bullets are more about in the future, if the financial forecast takes us to a place where we need to take action, this is what we'll start exploring. So I'll get a little bit more into that. Okay, so recap from previous conversations. We talked about our mission, which is reducing dependence on fossil fuels, how we've been doing against that, which is the graph on the bottom left. Big impact in the electricity sector so far compared to our baseline year. Still a lot to do on buildings, transportation, so you can see how that has changed over time. And then we talked about our value proposition. So what do customers think about? What do they see from us? It's our emissions impacts, it's our rates, it's our local investment, it's local control, having a meeting like this that they can actually come to, they can listen to, it's all in the public. These are all things that they associate with SVCE. We talked about who our customers are. 2/3 of our load is non-residential customers. It's important to remember as we're thinking through all of this. We also talked about how bills have changed in the last 7 years even, and that's the chart on the right. Bills have gone up significantly, driven by the transmission and distribution prices or rate essentially doubling for our customers, whereas generation, we're back to where we were roughly in 2019. So that means that SVCE's portion of the bill has gotten a lot smaller respectively, so we control less of what a customer's paying. And then we talked about our costs and our revenues and the gap that exists in our forecast, which is why we're filling that gap with reserves in our forecast today, and the different ways that we could fill that gap or close it, and really concluding that the biggest ongoing lever that exists is the rate setting at the end of the day. We also talked, this is a new slide, even though I called it a recap, but it's a thing we talked about, which is operational expenses. And I wanted to show kind of how those break down. A significant portion of this is non-discretionary. So it's things that we have to do in order to exist as a load-serving entity. We have to work with PG&E. We have to do our data management. There's mailers that we have to send out, things like that. But this is what we look at when we're trying to find ways to improve our efficiencies, things that we can reduce our costs on, as well as other things like the prepays that we have. That's one of the main savings that we have driven. We've done several prepays, and it drives, I think, almost $20 million a year in terms of power supply cost savings for us. So we'll also continue to explore new prepay options and things like that to save on our costs. And then we talked about the levers. This is kind of an overview of the feedback there. Want to continue with our current approach. We may not have to make changes as we get into the future. We don't know exactly where the forecast is going to go. And so that'd be the ideal, but that's why we're planning in case we have to. We want to do it in a balanced way. I mentioned that. And then because we know that essentially controlling it's not entirely in our ability to control whether or not we will always be able to stay below PG&E based on just the cost drivers that we have and where that looks. And so it's important to make sure that we continue to maintain the other aspects of our value proposition as well for our customers. So again, clean electricity was one of the levers. Local decarb programs is another lever. And our rate relative to PG&E is the third main lever. We talked about our current rate products. Most of our customer accounts are on Green Start, and that has a renewable target. It has a clean target. We have our Green Prime, which is an opt-up. We have our Green Prime Direct, which is for large commercial customers. And then we introduced this new split product, which is really further splitting our product and trying to say, what if we moved the Green Start to a premium to reflect our higher costs? And could we open up a opt-down product that would maintain a discount to PG&E, at least to start? There are a lot of ways to split your products, though. So this is sort of a next step piece, is if we get the approval for the playbook, this is what we will spend some time further fleshing out, discussing with the board, is what are different options for these products. Could have an additional opt-up product as well. We could make different decisions by city or by customer class. So there's a lot of different ways that this ultimately could go. And then one of the questions that I got in some of the committees and in previous board meeting was around, what are other CCAs doing? And I think it's a good question for us to consider. So I looked around and tracked down information for almost all the other PG&E CCAs to try to get a sense for that. And I'll say, it's a spread, and that makes sense because the CCAs are all different, right? We have different customer groups that make us up. We have different priorities that were established when we were set. We're at different levels of maturity. But there are some that are below PG&E today, and there are many that are above PG&E today. We have the largest non-residential load of the other CCAs in this area. And the default product for most of the other CCAs is not 100% clean, which is what our default product is today. But despite all of this, most other CCAs have participation rates in the mid-90s, which is we're at 96, 97% participation ourselves, and that's in terms of the total customer count. And I did want to highlight that San Jose Clean Energy, which looks pretty similar to us, did have an 8% premium for several years, back in 2021 and 22, I believe. And then they went back to a discount to PG&E. So they're currently back to a discount. And they did this same thing that we were talking about with this split product where you have an opt-down that is, at parity or below PG&E. And they really did not see any kind of significant opt-out occur compared to what they had previously. So they're still at 97% enrollment. They really didn't see very many people move to even that opt-down product, but it still was a useful thing for them to understand and create that bifurcation. So this is a chart you just saw from Scott, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but using the updated base case, which is the bar on the left, the blue bar, or the bar on the right, the blue bar, I created a line chart to try to show the same thing so that I could create some simplified examples. But this is that same data, just showing you, where we are today, what our forecast shows. And as Scott said, though we've seen an improvement in 2026, we're also forecasting a bigger draw in 2027. And so that's sort of a change. That's been an update since March. It's kind of different even than we thought back when we first adopted the budget for this fiscal year. There's been other changes, new rate proceedings, large load legislation in response to the data centers, things that we're tracking, our IRP runs that Maren presented, and our understanding of how big is the emissions or the clean supply lever. So there's a lot that has changed, but I would say today the main takeaway from this really is we're at a very strong financial position at this moment, and we are forecasting this drawdown next year. But this year, even we saw an improvement to our reserves. Yeah. So back to the playbook, based now that you're remembering all the things from our previous conversations around this. What are the 5 steps of the playbook? So the first one is, as I said, go after those operational expense savings opportunities, find efficiencies, continue to drive our costs down. The second step is, for planning purposes for 2026 and 2027, continue our current plan, which is remain at a discount to PG&E, remain at our clean targets, and continue to deploy our programs, which are important, as we heard earlier today, the comment about the Air District rules and supporting that and supporting our decarb mission. And I say for planning purposes, which is to say the board can always change any of these things that we say. So if the financial stress case starts to occur, we can revisit this sooner. But this would be the plan. And then on a forward-looking basis, we would say, okay, and starting in 2028, we would, if needed, introduce this idea of a split product. And we'll spend the time in between fully fleshing out what that would look like. But I would say, as an example, as a starting point, is this idea of moving the default clean product to a premium and having an opt-down product, let's say, that is cheaper than PG&E, so that we start to learn a little bit better who are our most price-sensitive customers, how much load are we talking about. We can kind of see what happens there without actually losing any customers to understand and inform us more in the future. And in that future, if the forecast continues as we have it, and we still see this draw on reserves, then we would say, okay, well, if we need to increase our premiums for these products over time, we would. And then as part of balance, the fifth bullet here is we would also incorporate a reduction and pause in our program deployments, sort of commensurate with the level that we were increasing the premium. So the idea would be we're kind of doing both of those things in parallel. So we're spreading the impact across all the different pieces. So what will it mean to approve this playbook? That's the first step here. Then over the next, let's say, 6 months to a year, staff would work on the product mix that I'm talking about. What is a split product? Where do we want to go with that? As we're already doing, we will continue to monitor our financial situation so that if we need to do anything sooner, we can. And then at future budget decisions, we will use this playbook to say, okay, we know this is the kind of shape of action that we can take, that we want to propose to the board. And we would discuss those. We would discuss alternatives. We would be able to kind of have that conversation, but it would all be guided by the direction of this playbook today. I wanted to give you, Scott's got all these really great graphs, and so I wanted to give you one, although he helped me make it. But it shows, again, the base case, and then it shows you kind of my example that I've laid out here is what if we continue as planned for 2026, 2027, and then as we got into 2028, we needed to create this split product. And then as we got into 2029, we needed to increase the premiums a little bit. This shows why this is an important exercise, because it allows us to say, we're not just going to follow the base case sort of down and draw down all of our reserves. We would know that we're going to start taking these actions, which would bend us up and start putting us back closer to what our target reserve level would be at that point. So this is, again, where we are in the process. It's all the way back in October that we started having some of these conversations. We're looking for this approval today, again, just on this playbook, which gives us these steps and this direction. And then in the future, we've got the stub budget, we've got the 2027 budget approval. Those will sort of both continue as currently planned. And then off in the future, we will move into the and sorry, I think it should be December 2027. We would be working on the CFY 2029 budget or 2028 budget at that point. And that's where we maybe would start to introduce some of the actions from the playbook. And with that, I just have this again for easy reference. So I will thank you and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments from the board? Director Makachek. Mike. Your mic. Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation. Very informative. And I just want to go through a couple of the slides, if that's okay. Could you go to slide 14, please? It's in your lower right, the 14. Whoop. Do you, like you showed us before how we've got residential, commercial, and C&I, whatever. Do you have the product mix by customer segment?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are they different, or is there something that pops out of
When you look at our split by load, which is maybe the most useful way to look at it, it is sort of smaller number of some of the large customers end up being on Green Prime, because there's usually customers that have renewable reporting requirements and things like that, where they value the being at 100%.
Climate action plans, that's where.
Or cities, yep, that's another group. But, our default green start is also 100% clean. And so it's just, do you need those renewable attributes for most of the folks that do that? So it skews more on the load side towards larger customers.
Okay. And then go to 19, please. I think this slide really shows the complexities that we're hearing about tonight, and you're bringing them all together. So I compliment you on that. So I just wanted to kind of see those two and talk about them. And then the new legislation that could be coming out on the PCIA transparency, will that help or hinder us from a decision-making perspective going forward? And it's kind of an open question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can say that transparency can only help us.
Yeah, transparency will help us because then we know how much of a hedge impact we're getting. If the legislation is right on that point as to how much of an impact that has on our portfolio, we'd be able to directly measure it. Right now, we have to estimate it, not having that information.
So let me play back. Right now, the fact that it's not fully transparent and there's some legislation going on, it can't get worse. We're in the worst case scenario from that perspective. It can only get better.
That I cannot commit to. How legislation goes, and also there's a PUC proceeding, very important in this area that I think Scott may have hinted at, where PCIA has been debated, and as to what the structure will be going forward, that will have a big impact on the risks of the business.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Tyson.
I hadn't decided whether to speak yet, but now I guess I will. When I saw this before, I didn't capture or catch the notion of if people chose the lower priced version, then they would be not have access to programs. And I thought that's an interesting thought. And I actually thought about it the opposite way, because I think there must be a big constellation of people who say, yeah, I'm really going to get around to this. I want to do the water heater. I want to do the furnace. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And so I wonder if there's, in terms of the premium price, if there's a way to say, you'll be able to say lock in, say like the way you lock in a mortgage rate, to say, I'm going to lock in my access to these programs for the next 5 years or something like that. I'm just thinking through other things to sort of get people to pay the higher rate. They may never get around to it, but at least the thought that they have this benefit would serve as something that would be an incentive at least.
Yeah, I think we heard that idea as well for like this sort of an opt-up, like green champion almost type of thing. Yeah. So I think that's something we would explore. I think the idea of program ineligibility, that's something that other CCAs have done, and so it's sort of there as an example for the opt-down rate. You sort of, what are you losing by opting down? And I think, and I know you know this, but just also to say it, for a residential customer, even at the, let's say a 4% premium, we're still talking about a $1 or $2 a month out of a $200 bill, basically. And so I don't know how everyone would react, and that's part of the kind of intent of doing that would be to find out if we needed to.
Thank you. Director Hines.
Yeah, thank you. Just on that slide 19, the bottom component, continued review of OpEx and increased efficiencies. Just the steepness of the drop. I'm not understanding why there's not really a look at the OpEx and increased efficiencies in order to flatten that out, or as a means to ease the potential risk of the days on cash on hand.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I would say, I think the bar on the right is trying to tell a little bit of that story here, which is to say the vast majority of our costs are on required energy supply and RA and like all of the costs that we have. So that's really what's driving this. So to your point, we can always try to shed, try to reduce that, and that can help us. But in terms of the magnitude of the gap that's in the middle here, especially knowing that some of our operating expenses are inescapable in order to be operational, and actually a significant portion are, the opportunity there isn't huge, but we are committed to taking that opportunity and making sure that we're doing so.
And what you're really saying is the purple is really where which is only 1 cent to the kilowatt. So is
That little
really
pink part,
what
yep,
you're
yep.
what you're talking about there. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So we'll try to shrink it, but it's not going to.
But it's not going to have that much of a difference.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wong.
Thank you. Good presentation. Love the risks and the scenarios that are being mapped out there. I do have a question. I know you're looking for price elasticity as to between commercial and residential. Have you factored in the risk as the SCC, I think a few weeks ago, has rolled back climate reporting rules as part of their reporting structure? Will that affect the commercial clients, the 66% that might be there? Because they no longer, I'm reading this, SCC launches formal process to rescind corporate climate reporting rules as of May 30th.
Yeah, I think that in a climate where our corporate customers are very aggressively pushing, their own targets and all this kind of stuff, that would support them staying on a rate that would be clean, even if it meant paying some additional premium, let's say. I think in a climate where some of that is retrenching and may not be top of mind for those corporations, I think there's more of a risk that they're going to follow the price, which I think is what we would expect. Still fractionally, we're not talking about huge amounts. And there's, I'm not really getting into also the fact that there's different ways that we would talk about this, we would market it. There's different ways that we would explain the lifetime. And we've been almost a decade of being below PG&E. We've delivered $200 million in lifetime savings to our customers. There's this large amount of value that we can point to and show. And this may change in the forward look because our forecast changes year over year. And so there's this piece of it where, we have delivered this value over time, but I do think that it increases the risk. And I think hopefully this first step in the playbook, if we got to that point, would let us even better assess that, because, right now it can be hard to tell what they say versus what they'll do and how to compare that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I had several questions. First, it's always great to kind of see this, and I appreciate the information about what other CCAs are doing, because I do think that that's important to see that, we keep shooting for that 1% less than PG&E, and there are multiple that are 10 to, I'm surprised, 60% above PG&E, which to me is a little shocking, but when you look at what component the rates are of the actual bill, it's such a small, it's 18% or less, that, and I think that's an important message, that beating that drum of, the costs that CCAs are doing as portion of your bill, as portion of your rates, are very minimal at the end of the day. I had a question about how the playbook lives past this point. So is it an actual document that will take shape of, or is it just kind of, here's certain plays that we have, from a city standpoint? From our climate action plan, we came up with a climate action plan, and then we came up with a playbook with specific plays that it's like, okay, here's what we're going to do over the next few years. Here we're kind of coming up with, here's a potential list of plays, and I wanted to touch base on at least on one or two of those. But how does that exist within the organization as you see it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I don't think it's as formal a document as like a climate action plan, let's say. I think that really what this is, when we started the conversation 9 months ago, we thought this year might see a $40 million draw from reserves, right? And so we thought this might be a very immediate action that we would need to start taking. And I think where we are now is, we have a better sense for what's really sort of happening this year. We have got our updated forecast for next year. And so it's okay, but we went through this really good exercise of having the conversations talking about it. So how do we craft that into something that gives us some guidance moving forward, knowing that it may still change further and we may need to pivot, further. So I think where it lives is we will have this approval if we get it tonight to kind of say, okay, this is the shape. It will give us some guidance on a few key next steps, which is to say the product mix. It'll tell us what we should be planning for the near term and showing you all and like talking about in terms of the budgeting process. And then, by the time we get to 2028, if we feel like we need to, we'll probably say, okay, harken back to to this conversation, this process. Here are these pieces. We may have some new members of the board. We may, there'll be some changes, but we'll have this then to point back to and to refer to. And then the board at that time will make the decisions that kind of, make sense and include the current state of the world. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I view it. It's sort of there. It's going to be always in our minds.
Thank you. Amrit?
I'll just add to what Justin said. So we just went through a risk management exercise, right? Stress test. This is also a risk management exercise. As a risk management exercise, part of it is what are the risk mitigants? Justin has laid out the risk mitigants that we're getting board approval for. So that gives us something in our toolbox as to how to mitigate this risk should this scenario pan out. And the other thing to notice from that chart, there's a huge drop of reserves in 2027. So we will learn a lot about this in just a few months, right? By December board meeting, when we bring the budget, we will have a good indication of how 2027 will shape up. And there are some moving parts there that are coming out, so that we'll have better information, just so you know.
Thank you. And that kind of leads to my next question. We've talked, and I just want to make sure that it's part of the playbook and listed as opposed to waiting to December of 2027 to say, okay, we'll create this new tier in 2028. The concept of creating a pilot tier or something of that nature and rolling it out in 2027 conceivably softens the cushion of that drop that we expect that will be happening in 2028. And, all this is, to a certain degree, is looking forward into the future that we don't, we thought that was going to happen maybe this year or at least in 2027. We're already seeing that it's being pushed out. But starting a program to affect, let's say, the amount of cash on hand and looking at creating this, because one of the other plays that we've talked about offline is that a city could decide to opt, if we had a green champion tier, whatever we call that new rate of, I'm willing to pay 3%, 4% higher than PG&E to make sure that, for whatever reason, I'm making a difference in the community. And it's $4 a month. It's not that much money in the grand scheme of your bill, but it would conceivably help this organization to some degree, depending upon how many people signed up. But creating that in 2027 to me has value, because conceivably our jurisdictions, a city could decide on its own to opt in its members into that organization. I know that many of our cities and many of our residents and many of us are going through elections and wouldn't consider increasing, the cost of living at all. But it is a very small fee at the end of the day. And so conceivably, another part of that playbook is a city, if it thinks that its members, if its residents are very sustainable, very green conscious, would be willing to do this with the concept that they could opt out to the 1% less than PG&E at any time, that could happen in 2027 conceivably. So it doesn't have to be the entire district, at least in discussions with Monica previously. A city could decide on its own to say, we're moving our members into the higher tier, whatever that, what the green champion tier or something of that nature. I think that has value. Now, whether or not the councils would be completely behind it, that's a whole other thing, but I want to make sure that that's captured as a potential play and education for future board members for both of those things. To me, the sooner we have a split rate, and not the split rates that we already have, but let's say I know I'm going to pay more rate available to everyone. I think it starts getting at least feedback on well, what will be the uptake, what will be the negativity within our community. So I think that has real value, and that's why I was asking, starting off with, is it a living document? Is it a living spreadsheet of here's what we plan to do, or is it just kind of the mental concept of the organization? And so I'm just trying to make sure that isn't lost, because I do think that ultimately a higher tier, and then conceivably a city deciding to opt its residents in with the concept that they can opt out if they feel that cost sensitive from a monthly basis, from a rate basis, they could decide to opt out, those sorts of things. But it's just trying to give you and giving this organization enough options at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I'll point taken, and we'll add that sort of to our list of thinking. I think this is the playbook should be viewed as sort of a minimum, for where we're going to go. And so I think this is a thing where we could take this and we'll say, okay, well, we should accelerate when we're thinking of this product design work. And maybe what comes out of that is this idea of, well, let's roll something out sooner. I think to Amrit's point, we'll know more in a few months. We're at a very high day cash on hand level right now, and in a very good way. And so what's sort of needed, what ends up being needed for next year, and where are we actually going to end up, that'll be, I think, instructive in thinking through that. But yeah, we'll definitely make sure that that's part of what we're thinking
and
about.
not that I'm trying to, let's say, push us in that direction immediately, but I think that the sooner we have that option waiting for us, it makes sense looking out 5 years where we're fairly certain that we'll be cutting into the days of cash on hand dramatically. But, even then things might change. There's a lot of flexibility from those models. And, and as Scott talked about with, risk management, it could be entirely different, but planning for that worst scenario. Okay, thank you. Director Makachek.
So picking up on your point, what I think I'm hearing from Chair Klein is that we don't have a refresh in the playbook. This will be reviewed at least once a year. Is that to include different new elements that could be put in based on information that we get?
Yeah, I would say we should at least be looking at this every few years, but I think this more near-term thing I would put into this product mix review and sort of bake it into that. So that is what the playbook says is sort of our next step is going to be. And so we'll just make sure that that's part of that process. Does that cover? Okay.
That's fine. And I think as we look at next year's budget, that becomes an obvious thing. So, yeah.
Okay. I was wondering if we actually want to explicitly state that.
I think it's
not required.
I don't think it's required.
Okay.
I think staff has captured that correctly. I think so. Director Showalter.
After listening to the comments, I thought of something I wanted to bring up as well. And that's that in my community anyway, people are really, really concerned with the reduction in greenhouse gases. And so as we roll these things out, to talk about how they differ in greenhouse gas reductions, use that. I know sometimes that's part of the marketing, but I think it's really important. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, capitalize or expand on Chair Klein's comment about the comparison with other organizations or other, in somewhat of, where do they rank, or where do they rate, and where do we target ourselves? And what can we use as a leverage that would compare with others? I think to me that it's always very helpful to be able to compare it to what others are doing, particularly when if we have to pull a lever, we can get an idea as to where it's going to put us if we need to as a comparison, and basically stealing ideas from others. So that's part of what I'm saying with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wang? Oh, okay. No other comments from the board? Let me go ahead and open up public comment. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to speak? I see one.
Yes.
Bruce?
Yes, I'm Bruce Carney. I brought some slides that I hope that the clerk can distribute to all of you if she hasn't already. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the chair of Carbon Free Mountain View. Carbon Free Mountain View and Sunnyvale Cool were the two activist organizations that went around to all the cities in the county that created this organization. I was at the first board meeting of SVCE, and I've been at more than half of all of them since then. I remember when this organization had only 4 employees. Now it has quite a few more than that. So what I'm having passed out is a historical look at the carbon emissions from all of the CCAs as well as PG&E. And there was a time when all SVCE customers could be very proud that they were getting their electricity from a zero carbon organization. We were the best, or I should say you were the best. Now you're 8th out of 13 or 14. 2024 was an aberration. I know that you'll get back on track. But to Mr. Hines' comment, this kind of comparison is something that I've been doing for years. I used to put out a document called How Green, How Cheap. I did that because it seemed to me that when the CCA movement came along, greener and cheaper than PG&E, the natural response for PG&E would be to try to get greener and to try to get cheaper than its competition. It turns out, though, based on the 60% higher gen rate that a CCA that's apparently still in business was able to do, that the most important thing that determines the success of an energy producing organization is incumbency. When PG&E was the incumbent, they could pretty much do what they wanted to do. But now you're the incumbent for all of your customers. And so it seems likely to me that rates can indeed go above PG&E, and you can stay clean. And in fact, when I saw that 60% number, which shocked me, it made me wonder, if we took ours to 60% up, what would we have for dollars for programs? Could we really start replacing all the furnaces and all the heat pump or all the gas water heaters in our service territory? I would love to see that stress case run and presented to the board. The upside stress, it could be very interesting. And I would love to see that. At the Air District Board meeting, one of my Mountain View friends, Mary Dadio, talked about a world where your water heater and your furnace exhaust the NOx and the particulates in your home. And she asked, if that were the world you lived in and somebody provided you a way to get water and heat from a device that didn't produce NOx, wouldn't you pay a little extra to not have that pollution in your home? And I thought it was a very interesting argument, and one that sort of flips the script on why it's important to get rid of pollution. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other speakers in the room.
None online, Chair.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the board. You pull up the last, thank you, slide. For a motion?
Sure. Motion
Director Wong.
to approve the staff's recommendation for approving the financial levers playbook.
I'll second that.
Director McIntyre. Thank you. That, can you please conduct the vote?
Yes, thank you. Director Hines.
Aye.
Page.
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Vice Chair Meadows.
Aye.
Martinez Patron.
Aye.
Showalter.
Aye.
Tyson.
Yes.
Hilton.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Klein.
Aye.
Mekachuk.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and the continued discussions. This is an interesting kind of what ifs for the future. Thank you. Next are board member announcements and direction on future items. Director Makachek.
Yes, I'm on the audit committee, and what I'd like to do is resign from the audit committee. And I know that I believe we should have 6 people on the audit committee, but I think with my vacancy, we'll make it 4. And what I'd like to do is see appointing a new person to serve on the audit committee on our next agenda in August.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Director Showalter.
Yes, I wanted to share that the city of Mountain View passed or put in our budget, which we will completely pass on the 23rd, $500,000 to add to our rebate fund. So we think that that will add another rebates for another 250 water heaters, heat pumps in our jurisdiction, and that's moving the GHGs in the right direction. So I just wanted to share that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Director Tyson.
Yes, I just wanted to express my appreciation to SVCE staff, in particular Pam and Juliet, for bringing the dream home to our town picnic, and our environmental initiatives committee for the town. We're very excited to have their booth right next to it, and got a lot of really great contact with our citizens because it's such a well-attended event. So thank you for participating to them.
Thank you. Director Hines.
Yeah, Campbell is very excited. We've just opened the library with the Santa Clara County Libraries. It was total electrical. And now we're even more excited now that the Campbell Police Department building is all electric, and the ribbon cutting is going to be before the next board meeting. So we're very excited from both of those new buildings.
Thank you. And that looks like all the comments from our board members. Thank you all. And with that, we will be adjourning the meeting at 9:02 p.m. Thank you all for being here. Good night.